Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the British Safety Council's first Wellbeing Together webinar of 2023. The title of this year's, this first event is New Year, New Wellbeing Plan. And during this lunchtime session, you'll get steps for success for setting up a wellbeing program without having a massive budget. In the remaining 15 minutes, you'll have an opportunity to ask further questions to support your organisation's needs. This session will be delivered by our Head of Wellbeing, Marcus Herbert, who will also be joined by Claire Calman from Starts With You. Claire will be sharing her insight and experiences with workplace wellbeing. Before we start and while we assemble the rest of the audience, we're just going to play you a short video to show you some of British Safety Council's initiatives around wellbeing. Bear with us for a few minutes and we'll be back with you again shortly. Thanks.
Interested in the well-being of your organization? Do you find it difficult to know where to start or how your existing well-being offering is working? We have worked with experts to create holistic well-being solutions suitable for organizations at any stage, including our unique Being Well Together program, the integrated solution for all your health, safety, and well-being needs. Our research indicates that only 49% of companies have a written well-being strategy, and most of those do not measure effectiveness. Our range of solutions help you to identify gaps in well-being provision, providing clear guidance on how you can address them. Becoming a supporter of the Being Well Together program means access to tools and resources, allowing you to effectively develop and implement a health, safety, and well-being strategy in a joined-up, holistic way. You will see the health and well-being of your workforce improve and make the most of your investments. The Being Well Together program is available from British Safety Council or Mates in Mind, both registered charities.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce our two speakers today. First of all, we have Marcus Herbert, who's the Head of Wellbeing here at the British Safety Council. He has 15 years experience and 2 degrees in the wellbeing industry. Marcus has worked with individuals, elite athletes and executives on enhancing their own personal wellbeing and reducing their risk of lifestyle diseases through effective behaviour changes and strategies. Transferring this experience into the corporate setting, Marcus has worked with organisations from micro to global on their approach to organisational wellbeing and how to develop an effective and meaningful wellbeing strategy. Marcus has developed training courses to support directors, line managers and employees on the most effective ways to embrace health and wellbeing at work. Claire Calman is the Business and People Manager at Starts With You. Claire has over 10 years experience in business administration and HR across a range of private and third sector businesses in the health and property services sector. Having gained qualifications in criminology, health and social care, and HR management, Claire has a passion for people, psychology, and human behaviour. Since joining Starts With You in 2018, Claire, as a part of the senior leadership team, is responsible for all business administration and people aspects, operating as a generalist to ensure the smooth running of the business, including various strategies from policy and procedures to employee engagement, corporate culture, and employee development. I'll now hand over to Marcus, who is going to lead the discussion from here on in. But please be aware there's a Q&A option in this webinar today. You can submit your questions throughout the session. There's a function within the webinar which you'll see on your right-hand side of your screen where you can actually do this. So feel free to submit questions as and when they feel appropriate. Thank you. Over to you, Marcus.
Brilliant, thanks, David, and thanks to Claire as well for joining us. We haven't done one of these webinars before where we've invited one of our supporters to join us in sharing insights and experience. So this is a great first from my perspective. Yeah, obviously, thanks everybody for joining us. Our first webinar of the series for 2023. We're going to be delivering a new webinar every month for the whole of this year. And we're actually starting off this webinar, really looking at the year ahead. The reason for this webinar today is because, January is often the time of year which people set aside some New Year's resolutions and, want to start thinking about positive change. And more often than not, New Year's resolutions will be centered around well-being as opposed to, anything else. So what we're going to do is spend 20 minutes just having a look at not only the history and science behind New Year's resolutions, but also how that could influence well-being strategy and planning for 2023. But we're also going to then have a look at what British Safety Council currently does in order to help organisations with their well-being planning and strategy moving forward. And then for the kind of 10 minutes towards the end of that initial session, we're going to invite Claire to come on to camera, come off mute, and we're going to go through a bit of a kind of panel discussion of sorts with Claire, so she can share her experience so far with Starts With You. And then after that, we'll move into a Q&A session. So as David mentioned there, any kind of questions you have throughout the session, feel free to pop them into the question box. If you pop who the question's for as well, if it comes up during the Q&A session with Claire, that would be great. So looking at Google searches for the word well-being and for the word strategy, I had a look at this last week, and it was interesting. First of all, I just looked at well-being as opposed to well-being plan or well-being strategy, and I could see that the 30 days leading up to last week, that there's been a kind of gradual trend on an upward, pattern of people searching for the word well-being and, the number of people searching for well-being. And then I started just looking at other words. I looked at words in combination. I looked at well-being plan. I looked at New Year's resolutions, and I just, by chance, happened to recognise that there was a very distinct pattern that links the word well-being and the word strategy. So what you can see here on the screen is literally just Google search trends in the 30 days leading up to last week. And you can see that not only the frequency, but also the kind of pattern of search between the word well-being and strategy is quite closely linked, which I think is quite interesting. By itself, of course, that's not research. You can't really draw any real solid conclusions off the basis of just Google searches. I think going into the Christmas period and into the New Year's, people probably aren't thinking too much about setting a well-being plan, for the following year to come. But I just think it is quite interesting. This does actually link into some of the research that I found when looking at this topic. So looking more specifically then at New Year's resolutions. And what we're talking about here is just New Year's resolutions on an individual basis. I appreciate that many of you might be joining today looking at, well-being plan for your entire organisation. So you might be wondering, well, what's the link here if we're looking at resolutions for individuals versus resolutions for, say, new well-being plans for companies? Well, the secret to this really is that companies are made up of individuals. So people are going to be setting their targets and aspirations within your organisations. So what I wanted to look at is who are setting New Year's resolutions this year, and what are their New Year's resolutions, and start to see whether or not we can unpack some of that information to help develop with our own well-being planning, for the year ahead. So this data is actually from data that was captured in November of 2022, so it is brand new data. It's from Forbes Health, and they've surveyed over 1,000 individuals to have a look at, what are they currently setting New Year's resolutions in. What I thought was quite interesting is that if you look at the data set just on the screen at the moment, in answer to the question, do you feel pressured to set the New Year's resolution? What you can see is that generally the younger population have a higher perceived pressure to set New Year's resolutions and to set targets. I thought that was quite interesting. And this does kind of link in as well to the concept of needing to understand your demographics of your organisation to understand what their needs are when setting New Year's resolutions. I've just got a note from the events team to say, Marcus, the slides are cut in half, and that you can see the notes. So let me see what's going on there. Apologies all. Okay, I think if I was to share my screen instead of the slides, that might help. Okay, so if I could get a note or something from the events team to let me know if they can now see my slides okay. Okay, brilliant. Right, so apologies for that slip up there, completely my fault. Hopefully you can now see the slide that I was talking about previously when I was looking at the Google Trends. So yeah, this was the imagery just to show you the correlation between the search term's well-being and the search term strategy. And then this that you can now see is the data from Forbes Health looking at New Year's resolutions. I'm going to keep a close eye on the notes from the events team as well in case I do anything else wrong, but that is completely my fault, apologies. So yeah, as you can see from the data here, that the younger generation are more likely to feel pressured to set New Year's resolutions, which I think is quite interesting. Let's have a little look at what people are setting New Year's resolutions in for 2023. So as you look on the data, look at the data on the right-hand side, you can see that most of the New Year's resolutions are specifically linked to well-being in more ways than one. Looking at things like drinking less alcohol, improving their diet, improving finances, I think is quite a poignant one at the moment with the cost of living and rates of inflation. But the obvious ones, things like improving fitness and also improving mental health. Then even coming down to look at things like learning a new skill. Now, in some cases, people may not make a link between learning a new skill and well-being, certainly not at an employee well-being level, but actually learning is something that does form part of one of the domains of well-being that we currently speak with organizations about. Also making time for hobbies, again, that does tie in with just spending time enjoying yourself. And also making more time for loved ones. Again, that might not be looked at traditionally as an intervention to support somebody's well-being, but again, as part of the domains of well-being, having a good social well-being is important as part of the overall relationship with improving well-being over time. So let's just again have a look at this data in a little bit more detail, and you can see that the top 5 areas that people are setting New Year's resolutions for at the moment center around improving mental health, improving fitness, and also losing weight, improving diet, and improving finances. So these are the areas that people are self-reporting that 2023, these are the areas that they themselves are looking to focus at. Of course, we're all about using data in order to understand well-being plans and well-being objectives. And so if we know as a general rule of thumb that these are the areas that individuals are looking to improve over the coming year, then potentially that could be interesting data to use with planning for well-being within organizations over the year to come. So where do these idea of New Year's resolutions actually come from? I think everybody on this call may have been in a position at some point where they've either set a New Year's resolution or they've thought about setting New Year's resolutions, or they know of people that have set resolutions at some point. And so I always like to look at where did things originate. I like to look at the history of things whenever I start to explore a particular subject. And so when I started looking at, well, where did New Year's resolutions come from? It's estimated that they actually first originated over 4,000 years ago with ancient Babylonians. So they actually used to have a 12-day religious festival, which they called a Kitchu. And it would actually run mid-March. So their year used to be from mid-March to mid-March. And over that 12-day festival, they would plant new crops, and it would all be about the celebration of new planting and new things to come. And so they would actually make promises to their gods. They would pay back any debts and return any objects they borrowed, or else they fall out of God's favor. And then it wasn't then until a few thousand years later, under Julius Caesar in ancient Rome, where Julius actually changed the year to start at the 1st of January. And this was in line with the god Janus, which was believed to be the two-faced god, and symbolically would look backwards and backwards at previous years and forwards into the future. And again, in a similar way to the Babylonians, Romans would actually offer sacrifices to their gods as a representation of, future change and growth. Now, I appreciate that when we're setting our New Year's resolutions, these aren't things that we're doing anymore. We're not sacrificing to gods of any description, but still, there seems to be a reason that New Year's resolutions are set, and this is something that could have some form of influence over the success of our wellbeing planning into 2023. So moving away from the history of New Year's resolutions and looking at more, maybe a bit of the science behind it, some psychologists have actually found that there's a link between the way that we store our memories and the way that we then set up change within our lives. So psychologists suggest that we actually view our life itself as a series of chapters as opposed to just one long continuum. So significant changes in our life, which might be things like going to university or getting married or having children or changing jobs, we seem to be able to remember those temporal landmarks much more significantly than just other random occurrences within our lives. And because of the fact that we can remember those specific temporal landmarks, those specific events and those specific chapters, we seem to be able to link our behavior to those specific chapters in our lives as well. So further research has started to look at these temporal landmarks and establish whether or not there is actually a link between those landmarks and behavior change. And this one bit of research that was done in 2014, which looked at the fresh start effect, used a popular behavior change app called Stick, and they had a look at whether or not people were using specific timeframes, and then whether or not there was a link to their success with those specific timeframes. And what they found was that, like New Year's, there was also other kind of key holidays or key dates that people would seem to set targets for. So after holidays or Monday, there would be an uptick in new goals being set. And again, what they postulated was that there seems to be this fresh start mentality that when we have a specific date in mind that we decide to make changes, that we can actually link that to a new version of ourselves. And so we let go of the previous version of ourselves that failed in that particular area, and we're looking more forward to the future version of ourselves that is more likely to make these aspirational changes. And so what they then wanted to do was, these same researchers, after this fresh start effect research in 2015, they wanted to look at whether or not they could introduce an artificial fresh start. So rather than having a set day like a Monday, or rather relying on something as big as New Year's Eve, they introduced some reminders to people that were setting behavior change objectives. So they invited people that were looking to already make behavior changes to sign up to a reminder newsletter. So obviously, it was up to them as to whether or not they took part in this newsletter. And then they positioned each of the reminders in different ways to find out whether or not they could artificially stimulate this fresh start effect. So they would use something really vague, like the third Thursday in March, or they would use something really specific, like the beginning of spring. And what they found was that when they created this, artificial fresh start, where there was a specific date where targets would be linked to, that again, people would tend to set more objectives or be more akin to aim for those objectives when they had this kind of artificial temporal landmark. And so interestingly, this concept of setting New Year's resolutions and reassessing our wellbeing plans within our organizations, there does seem to be a link between change in a positive way and using dates such as the beginning of the year to reassess our current delivery. But what about the success of these changes? I think I'm definitely guilty in the past of setting a New Year's resolution, and then only a few weeks into that New Year's resolution, realizing that I haven't once participated in my New Year's resolution. And then in other times, I found that I've been more successful in my behavior change when it hasn't been linked to the New Year's resolution. We've even got now apparently Quitters Day, which is the second Friday in January. So we've even got a kind of nominated day now for when we set New Year's resolutions, that there is a day that we should quit those New Year's resolutions. But thankfully, not everybody is as ill-disciplined as myself, and people have found success in setting New Year's resolutions and making changes into the new year and it lasting a period of time. So there was a large-scale experiment that was done in 2020, and it had a look at the respondents and self-reported New Year's resolutions, and then over the coming 12 months, how many of them were able to stick to the changes that they originally agreed to at the beginning of the year. And around 55% of the respondents were able to keep to their New Year's resolutions within that 12-month period. 11% of those were at least 6 months, 14% at least 3 months, and then 19% lasting 1 month. So again, behavior change is a complex thing, but what that data is suggesting there is that there was a large cohort of people that were able actually to set New Year's resolutions and stick to them over that initial 12-month period. Some later research that was published 2021 from YouGov again looked at the number of people that managed to stick to their New Year's resolutions, stick to their goals, and they found 35% were able to stick to those goals they'd set, and 50% of those same cohort of people managed to keep to some of their resolutions, where they'd created a number of. Now, of course, looking at this, you might think, oh well, is there any point then in setting New Year's resolutions, or is there any point in us creating a new wellbeing plan if not 100% of those that take part in it are going to see success? Well, yes, there is a point to that, and we're going to expand upon that in a little bit more depth in the slides to come. But also it's important to consider that there is a difference between just setting New Year's resolutions, setting new wellbeing plans, and expecting success. We're going to explore that in a little bit more depth. But before we do that, I just want to kind of raise your attention to this last research that I've included, which is looking at actually the goal type itself is something that does have an impact on the success outcomes of any wellbeing plan or any wellbeing change that either individuals or organizations actually make. And it's that action-oriented goals are much more likely to result in success after a year than avoidance-oriented goals. So taking some of the New Year's resolutions that we were looking at earlier in the slide deck, if somebody was to increase their exercise as opposed to not doing something, the chances are they will have more success by having an action-oriented goal like increasing their exercise than avoiding something else that they're trying to do as one of their New Year's resolutions. So rather than simply stripping something out, research suggests that replacing that activity or exercise or lifestyle choice with something else may result in more success. But what I want to do is drill down more specifically into almost a kind of case study of somebody's well-being at an individual level. And then what I'm going to do is extrapolate that into an organizational level. And in a moment, what I'm actually going to do is ask a question. After I've gone through this slide, I'm going to ask a question to the audience. And I'd like it if those responses could be put into the chat box of the GoToWebinar system. And then I'd like to invite David to come back off mute, just to let me know what some of the responses are from the audience. I know there is a bit of a delay as well from chats being submitted into the chat box and then being received at our end. So we'll take that into account. Right, before we do that, wellbeing change at an individual level. So one of the things that I used to do probably about 12 years ago was I used to deliver health assessments to individuals, and we would have a look at a whole host of different areas of their well-being. We'd have a look at their family history of any lifestyle related diseases. We would go through a series of physical tests, and we would do blood testing, we would do fitness testing, we would go through questionnaire data that would allow us to have a look at their current stress levels. And we'd also work with other specialists such as doctors to establish an overall picture of these individuals' health and well-being. And with that in mind, after we'd gone through all of these different factors, we'd be able to put together a risk profile for these individuals. We'd be able to find out, do they have any areas within their existing lifestyle that may be increasing their risk of any lifestyle related diseases? So are they at risk of increased diabetes? Are they at risk of heart disease? Is there anything from their family history that linked with their lifestyle choices might put them at more risk of developing diseases in the future? And this wouldn't be to kind of scare people off. This would be to, ideally where possible, give people a full bill of health, but it would be able to give them the opportunity to make changes should they wish to make changes to help reduce their risk of disease in later life and increase their quality of life as well. And so if we take this individual here, let's imagine that they've come in for one of their health assessments, and we've gone through a whole host of areas of risk assessment. We've looked at their family history, we've looked at their lifestyle choices, and what we found, if you look at the images around this person, what we found is that the areas in green are not presenting any risk to their lifestyle in the future, but the areas that have flagged up in red have highlighted that they actually may need to make some changes in order to reduce their risk of diabetes, of heart disease, of stroke, of cancer in the future. And so if you took this individual that has all these significant areas that they need to change in order to reduce their risk of disease, it might be reasonable to expect that the prescription for somebody like this would be to do things like start exercising, stop eating donuts, no sugar in their coffee, stop eating processed foods, start to lose weight, quit smoking, and speak to a specialist about their mental health. And so I think if you're ever in a position to go through something like a health assessment or do a self-review of your own lifestyle areas, if you were to look at that level of prescription and think to yourself, well, that's a lot. I'm not sure whether or not I can do all of those things. I recognize that all of them are important. I recognize that all of them are technically in that red risk area, but I'm not sure whether or not I can commit to doing something about all of those things. And so if there was prescription versus discovery, discovery being a person asking you which one of those two areas are most important to you to see change, or what lifestyle choices would you like to explore moving forward. If you are presented with either a prescriptive approach or a discovery approach, and you had to pick one of those, either a prescriptive approach of you must do all top 7 things, or a discovery approach asking you what is the most important thing for you to see change at the moment, question to the audience is, which one would you pick? Would you pick the prescriptive approach of this is exactly what you need to do? Or would you pick the discovery approach of understanding what are your areas of interest and what are the areas that you need to explore? And then I'd like to invite David to come off mute and to let me know what kind of responses we've got coming through from the audience.
Hi, Marcus. Yeah, we're definitely getting a lot of people endorsing the discovery approach at this stage. Indeed, fantastic. Yeah, consistently coming through as discovery. So yeah, that seems to be the way forward.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that puts my point across enough. Perfect. Thank you, David, for coming back on. So what I want to do now, I think everybody, that's responded to that, everybody's on the same page as me as well. Discovery is absolutely better than prescription. And what we're talking about now is at an individual level, at a personal level. So how does this actually then relate to at an organizational level? Well, if you look very closely at the slide, if you look on the right-hand side, the only thing that's going to change now is the prescription and discovery, and also the word and the title is going to change from individual to organizational. Now what I want you to do is reposition your thought process and no longer think of this as just an individual that has gone through this risk profile, and think of this as an organization, as a collective, have gone through a process of understanding what their particular needs are from the well-being of their employer. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see now that the prescription has changed to, in order for you as an employee to benefit your well-being, we want you to make use of our EAP. We want you to speak to the mental health first aiders. We want you to use the discount site. We want you to sign up to our discounted gym. We also want you to talk to your line manager. We want you to use the flexible working policy. And we also want you to attend this training that we're putting on this week. You've got that approach versus the discovery, which essentially is exactly the same as the previous slide. It's just rather than what lifestyle changes would you like to explore, it's what workplace changes would you like to explore. Now, I'm going to extrapolate that if I was to ask that same question to the audience, which one would you as an employee or which one would you as an employer prefer to experience or deliver, I would estimate that discovery is probably, again, going to be the vast majority of the responses. But interestingly, we do still tend to see within the literature and many of the organizations that we work with, the kind of prescription model does still tend to be the approach that is taken as opposed to the discovery model. And so this is going to kind of tie into, again, what our recommendations would be for how to set up a wellbeing plan for 2023, or how to assess your existing wellbeing plan and wellbeing strategies going forward. So if you've ever attended one of our webinars in the past, I'm sure you would have seen our 10 steps to a successful health and wellbeing program. And what I'm not going to do today is go through every single one of those 10 steps. What I'm going to do is focus more on step 1 and step 2. And ultimately, whether or not you're currently setting up a new wellbeing plan for 2023, or whether or not you're already into a 1, 2, or 3-year wellbeing strategy for going forward into this year, using this temporal landmark of January of 2023 could be a good time to just take stock of how are you currently performing within your wellbeing plan, or to determine how it is you need to set up your wellbeing planning for the rest of this year. And one of the ways in which you can do that, of course, step 1 is understanding the optimal steps for a successful health and wellbeing program, but also step 2, assessing your requirements. Now, assessing your requirements ideally should come from that discovery phase with the employees to understand what it is that their needs are, so that any activity you do going into 2023 can be relevant to what they will actually engage with. So again, it doesn't matter whether or not you're setting up a wellbeing strategy brand new for 2023, or whether or not you're in an existing strategy. Now could be a good time for you to just take stock. And of course, there are multiple ways in which you can take stock to understand, how things are currently performing. But some of the ways in which the British Safety Council supports organisations doing that is with the organisation assessment tool that we have as part of our Being Well Together programme. Also the Employee Wellbeing Survey, which again is part of our Being Well Together programme. And two of those things combined actually can present a gap analysis to show the difference between what an organisation perceives it's currently doing for its employees, and then what the employees would want to make use of or thinks that the organisation is providing to them. And that gap analysis is something that we often really see as significant value in organisations that want to go through that discovery phase and want to provide something that the employees themselves are actually going to engage with. But also now we're in a position where we're able to provide bespoke wellbeing consultancy. So in addition to the organisation assessment tool and the employee wellbeing survey, we're also able to actually work with organisations to drill down into their specific needs and put together frameworks that are in line with that discovery phase and providing specific guidance on what organisations can do in order to see success with their wellbeing planning for 2023. And then those of you that are familiar with our 5-star audit portfolio, of course, we do have our 5-star wellbeing audit that again can really get down into the specifics of how an organisation is performing from a wellbeing perspective. And so all of these areas can be a really good way to take stock at the moment, but also to identify what areas at the moment need to be worked on, what areas need to be the focus point for your organisation moving into 2023. And so at this point, on time as well, I would like to bring Claire back into the session. And so Claire, if you'd like to come off mute and to come off camera, or come on camera as well. What I'm going to do is, because of me not being very good at IT this morning, I've stopped showing my screen now, so hopefully people can only see myself and Claire on screen. And Claire, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate having you here and being able to share your insight and expertise.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and this is the first time that we've done this as well. We've never been in a position where we've actually invited somebody that's going through the Being Well Together program to just share their experience to date, not necessarily how they're currently using the Being Well Together program, but just a little bit about what your needs were in the past and where you found success or where you haven't found success, and then also some of the things that you would actually recommend to people being in a similar position to you in the past. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us, and I have put together just a series of questions for Claire. So we're going to run through those questions, and once we've done those, then we'll be able to look through any of the Q&A that have come through during the session today. Okay, so Claire, question number 1. For those that haven't come across Start With You, can you just tell us a little bit more about your organisation and the role that you do?
Yeah, of course. So Starts With You, we're a small social enterprise based in Bolton with approximately 50 employees at the moment. And we're about creating opportunity and access for people to work We do this through a range of different services. So we have two sides to the business. We have a support side of the business and an environmental. And we work with individuals and businesses alike. So the support side, which works very well with the wellbeing side as well, is money advice, home energy advice, career advice and life coaching. And the environmental side is our very commercial side. It's handy persons, caretaking, garden work, void clearances and biofogging. So basically assisting companies and households in all aspects of property management and maintenance.
Right, so yeah, quite far reaching then by design of things.
Yes, yeah.
Brilliant. So then kind of with that in mind, and obviously linking back into our kind of topic area for today, why is workplace wellbeing something that's important to you and to your organization?
We pride ourselves on being a very ethical business, and we're built on our values, and basically our people are our greatest asset. Without them, we wouldn't be able to deliver the services to the community that we do. So it's important that we support and look after people within our available resources. We've got a very, very diverse team, with having a very manual side of business and environmental, and then the support side, which is kind of community and office based. So we have quite a range of needs of people. And workplace wellbeing it's helping people and supporting people as a whole, and not just for work that's important. It can have quite an impact on people outside of work, and we found that that's very important to look after your people. Yeah,
and so it's interesting that you've highlighted that you yourself have got quite a diverse workforce, and of course in the sector of workplace wellbeing, I think the majority of people that work within this space have all got very different backgrounds, qualifications, experience. So just kind of more focused on you, what's your previous experience with workplace wellbeing?
So I've worked in a couple of sectors. I've worked in the health sector and also in property as well as now. And I've been a manager and an employee and recipient of workplace wellbeing. So I've been on both sides of good and bad packages from companies. So that's given me the experience and the drive to make sure that our company gets it right and listens to people. So it's where I work now, it starts with you. It's a very high priority for us as a leadership team and as an employee, as part of the workforce. So we've changed things over the period, mostly with your support through the programme, that we include 3 different areas of psychological, physical and financial. And my previous experiences, I've very rarely seen the financial aspect within workplace wellbeing, so that we're targeting that now.
That's great, and that kind of ties in nicely as well with the New Year's resolutions data for this year. People are putting that in their top 5 areas to to be able to make changes around. So makes perfect sense. So with you mentioned there, you've had some good experience, you've had some bad experience, with well-being in the workplace. What, if any, approaches to workplace well-being have you found success in yourself in the past?
Definitely consult with employees. So listen to what people's needs are, understand what people are looking for. It's no good spending all your budget on packages that people are just not going to want or need, and make sure that there's a lot of communication about it. I've worked in companies where I've not really known that support has been available until somebody's mentioned it. So that communication and keeping the momentum going is really important. And it's not something that just happens once or overnight. It's something that should evolve. And it will change because your workforce needs will change, the economy will change. We had a pandemic a couple of years ago that completely changed how we approach certain things. And the final thing I'd say that is involve training in the wellbeing strategies, because different aspects, different topics can really, really help, whether that's from resilience or awareness subjects such as mental health, or menopause is one of our themes this year. it really brings in engagement and understanding.
Yeah, great. And it's interesting that where you're doing things in order to find success because of your past experience. But you've also highlighted there one of the complexities of well-being is that it does need to be iterative. It does need to change and adapt and evolve over time, which can make it more difficult to then assess the effectiveness or the success of the well-being work that you're doing. So, a bit of a risky question, but what did success look like in what you've done in the past? Did you take any benchmark data to evidence your success? What kind of approach did you take?
So I am quite a data-driven person. So I've done lots of pulse surveys throughout the time, asked key questions in focus groups. So you've got more chance for people to express and comment. And one of your points earlier around the discovery stage was, what changes would you like to see in the workplace? I found focus groups were fantastic for that. It was a very open, safe space that people could just explain what they were missing or what was working really well. And I found other data that you collect, particularly in HR, such as sickness absences and exit interviews, really give you some further information as to what's happening in the workforce and whether what you've implemented is working or needs any adjustments. And we also have a staff forum, and they are fantastic as a source of information, but also as ambassadors, because they help get that message across the company from peer to peer. So you get lots of little insights from many different areas. And success, it's hard to measure because it can be something very, very minor or simple, as somebody who wouldn't normally have reached out, actually reaching out and accepting support. And it could mean somebody sustaining work, staying in work, rather than going and getting a fit note and not getting necessarily any support. So I gauge it on very different areas, because it's very complex, as you say.
Yeah, that's right. But it sounds like everything that you've done where you found success, you've done it based on the actual need of the group that you're delivering it to, as opposed to what you thought was the right thing for them.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, I think as human beings, we generally do have a negativity bias. So we're much better equipped at raising our negative experiences than our positive experiences. So with that in mind, to counter the success that you've seen, what approaches, if any, to workplace wellbeing have you found didn't work for you?
Number one, don't compare yourself to other companies' offerings. Some people will companies will give a big shiny label of, we do all of these things. Every company's workforce needs are different, and every company's budget is different. So definitely don't compare yourselves to other companies, because it doesn't help, it doesn't work. It is good to see what's available and use it as, oh, that's interesting, can we do that? But yeah, don't benchmark yourself against other companies, and always plan and learn. I came into wellbeing, creating the wellbeing strategy on my own and wondering, how do I get this going, and actually reaching out to the British Safety Council and Being Well Together gave me a plan and an idea. So speak to people, don't sit and hold it all on your own shoulders, because that doesn't always work. And it does allow it to evolve. Yeah,
it's interesting as well that even though you've seen areas that didn't work for you, rather than moving past that, you've actually then found ways in which to evolve that, so then it does turn around to benefit you. That's really interesting. So then, you mentioned there the Being Well Together program. What was it that led you to to join the Being Well Together program?
A colleague actually sent me a lot of information. I attended, or I think I'd watched one of the webinars and thought, okay, I'll have a look at this. Met Joe, had a great conversation, and the structure in the planning, particularly somebody doing it as a lone worker, lone HR generalist, it gave me a lot more confidence in how to set things out, and it relieved a lot of pressure for me. So yeah.
Well, great. I'm sure Joe will be pleased as well to get an honorary mention within the session. I won't hear the end of that. So obviously the Being Well Together program is something that isn't, it's not a quick fix. It's not something that you suddenly get all the answers and then you move forward. It's something that's, spread out over a period of time. And, in many cases, 3 years upwards. So what stage are you at the moment with the Being Well Together program?
So we've got, we've implemented a lot of the different things from changing our EAP to we've had a free financial advisor in to do workshops. We're in our second year of implementing different types of awareness training, and then lots of little bits in between. I'm looking forward to gathering data at the end of this year as a comparison for the first audit. But the policy headline is about to go to my board for the full-blown, where do I take this in the next few years? So yeah, exciting times.
Brilliant. So let's assume the board are all fully switched on and they agree with everything that you put forward. What are the kind of next steps for 2023? In terms of your workplace wellbeing plan, what are your next steps?
That'll be looking at all of the data and any areas of learning. Gaps will be a big one, looking at the gaps and comparing to budget. Can we make changes? I will be going back into focus groups with the team, because it's imperative for me to actually get the information and data properly. And then one of our big ones that we're doing this year is we're including menopause training for the whole company to assist with awareness. We created a little group internally for people to have a safe, open space, and it's done so well that we've adapted and said, okay, let's crack on with some training and make that awareness a more open point of conversation in the company, and not something people should be a bit worried about talking about. So yeah,
great. It sounds like an action-packed 2023 then. So I've got one last question for you, which is really kind of hopefully a running theme of these webinars, and that is what would be the top 3 things you would recommend anyone looking to set themselves up for workplace wellbeing success?
I'm at the risk of repeating myself. Understand your employees' needs, listen to feedback, ideas. It is incredible how many people will come forward with a thought, that something that you may not have come across, that you can bring in. Work within your budget and don't compare yourself to other companies. It's not a one size fits all. It's based on your company and your people's needs. And have a plan, but remember, things can change and evolve, so don't worry if it does need to change.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire, so much. Really appreciate it. I've just realised as well that with time, we've actually been so engrossed in conversation that I've actually run a little bit late. So what I'm going to do now is hopefully people can now see my screen again. And I'm just going to show the audience. So as part of attending today's webinar, you'll be eligible to have a 30-minute complimentary consultation with one of our experts. If that is something that would be of interest to you, then you can use your scanner on your phone to scan the QR code on the screen. Or if you don't have a scanner on your phone, you can take a note of the number or the email address that's on the screen. And you can reach out to us and just let us know that you attended the webinar, and we'll be able to set up a 30-minute complimentary consultation. And so this is us now reaching the Q&A section of the webinar, which I appreciate. We have now overrun a little bit. So David, if you wouldn't mind coming back off mute and just letting me know whether or not we have actually had any questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, sure, Marcus. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Claire, also. I think you must have ticked all the boxes, actually, Marcus, because at the current moment, we don't have any questions resulting from the presentations. So, well.
Okay, well, then that also means that we can almost run to time as well. So, David, I'll hand over to you to close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. So thanks everybody for joining. I think we've had well over 200 people joining the session today. So not bad for our first instalment of 2023. Just to let you know that this presentation will be available on our British Safety Council YouTube channel from going forward. And also, if you do have any questions that you are too shy to ask today, you can ask them in private via the response function to the email that you'll be sent out subsequent to this particular session. But apart from that, thank you so much for joining us today. Our next event will be at the end of February, and we will be sent full details in due course. That is all for today and all for January. Thanks very much for being part of the Being Well Together webinar, and we'll see you in the next instalment. Thank you.